Warning! The following is a negative review of a game that most people like. Hi, I'm Jason Graves. Never trust anyone who needs a haircut. And Soul Blazer sucks. Okay, maybe it doesn't suck. Disappointing would be a more accurate descriptor. I didn't go into this expecting to dislike. I do like the developers. Quintet previously created ActRaiser, and I love ActRaiser. Everyone who talks about Soul Blazer only has good things to say. An underrated action RPG, they'll say. The story and gameplay are arguably more solid than Quintet's other works, they proclaim. I'm going to be the asshole. Fair warning, this is going to be 10 minutes of me howling my criticisms into the black void that is the 50 to 60 people that actually watch my videos. Soul Blazer is very much a revisiting of ActRaiser. There are many analogs and parallels, both surface level and beneath the crust. It reuses sound effects, copies and pastes the same life bars and font. Both player avatars are human-like manifestations of a deity referred to as the Master. Both games have the same overall goal, which is to resurrect the world, and they both revolve around sealing monster lairs to ensure the safety of your townspeople. And finally, both games are divided into two distinct types of areas. Soul Blazer's two area types are the traditional JRPG town, where you trade items for other items and meet progression prerequisites by doing some combination of the two. Let me know, preferably in the form of an algorithm helping comment, if the following sounds like fun. The main gameplay loop of Blazer is kill every enemy in the combat zone by standing slightly off center of the spawner and mashing B. Once you farm a spawner of its inhabitants, someone in the town is revived. You move on to the next one until the entire town is brought back, and you do this 6 times until you've conquered the video game. That's all you do. Farm monster spawners. That's the core mechanic. Both games begin with you in this odd post-apocalypse situation where God returns to the world, but everyone is dead. In ActRaiser, you're literally recreating the world. The inhabitants start from scratch, almost as if no other people had ever existed. For example, they, as a society, don't even have music until they invent it themselves. ActRaiser is the rebirth of the idea of humans. On the other hand, Soul Blazer literally has you revive each individual person one at a time. You're still resurrecting the world, but the people are still the same ones from pre-apocalypse. You're not giving humanity as a whole a second chance. You're giving the individuals a second chance. The thing that strikes me as odd, and why this approach doesn't work as well, the people continue on as normal. To them, nothing has changed, but it doesn't quite add up because they're aware of death toll in the apocalypse, yet they still continue to live their lives like nothing happened. Imagine that this game's plot is represented by a book with 10 chapters. Those 10 chapters represent the story in its entirety. 8 chapters into the story, humanity is wiped out by death toll, and you come down to pick up the pieces. You jump into the story after a lot has already happened, and the game simultaneously has you muckraking the downfall of what happened in the first 8 chapters, while the plot is at the same time marching forward through the last 2. You essentially need to revive everyone so those chapters can happen. Another difference between this game and ActRaiser, the latter had separate vignettes for each sub-area, while here it tries to tell one longer story. The problem is there isn't enough content to carry the entire game this way. The plot of Soul Blazer would have fitted in nicely as one of the segments in ActRaiser, but as an entire game it feels remarkably thin. Nothing much happens until you're in the last couple of areas. ActRaiser also has better individual moments that stand out and stick with you, such as the boy Teddy or the man who gets lost in the desert. Soul Blazer hinges its entire plot on a character named Dr. Leo. The NPCs build him up through the entire game, but when you finally meet him, he has about 2 lines of dialogue before he suicide bombs some random soldiers. The entire sequence doesn't make any sense. Dr. Leo tells you to take the key to the airship so you can escape from the pursuing enemies, but then he suicide bombs them. They're all dead. There's no reason to escape now. You still need to ride the airship for some reason. It takes you to a boss fight, which is admittedly my favorite fight in the game, but there's no reason for it to exist, because when you beat him, you just bring the airship back to where you came from. You just escaped from nothing to kill a bird that was never mentioned before and will never be mentioned again, all so you could end up in the exact same place.
Let's talk about ActRaiser again.
The dualities in that game are much more pronounced than they are here. The towns and combat sections are distinct gameplay entities, but they look exactly the same in Soul Blazer. Both aspects work better in ActRaiser. The town segments are more fun as a SimCity-like than as a half-baked traditional JRPG town, and the side-scrolling action is a lot better than the overhead swordplay. ActRaiser builds itself. It places all of the unique elements, the theming, the story vignettes viewed from the perspective of God, and constructing a civilization is built on a side-scrolling Rastan clone. Rastan has a gameplay style that can still hold up. It's solid enough to hold the rest of the game's ambitions on its back. Underneath all the skin, Soul Blazer builds itself on a second-rate clone of Gauntlet, a game infamous as the quintessential quarter sucker, the original play-to-win. The biggest difference, I believe, ActRaiser's skeleton is Rastan, which can still be fun, and Soul Blazer's is Gauntlet, which is what rots it from the inside out. It can't sustain itself on that kind of gameplay loop, especially when 99% of the spawners are so easily cheesed. The main mechanic is to destroy all the monsters. You can't play it as a stealth game. You can't avoid any of the enemies your first time playing because you never know which ones revive the important NPCs. The entire game devolves into standing slightly off center of a spawner and continuously attacking until you win. And if it feels like I'm harping on this one point way too much, you have to understand that this is the game. Like, this is the entire gameplay loop. It's just doing the same things over and over. This game is so repetitive. It may be hypocritical coming from me, someone who is doing a series on RPGs, a genre famous for needing to grind, which is the definition of doing the same thing over and over again before you can progress. And honestly, if you feel that way, you might be more correct than I am. I'm just one guy and I feel a certain way. People praise the story, but honestly there's not much to it. It's a typical Mankind Gone Too Far plot. It's about a scientist who keeps inventing things until one day he invents a way to communicate with the devil. He makes a deal with the king of the land to exchange ritualistic human sacrifice for money, but it's a monkey's paw sort of thing where everybody ends up sacrificed. After you beat the game, the king says that he'll use his money to build a statue of you and Dr. Leo, which raises the question if he's using the blood money obtained from the devil to do so. The ending has you giving up your god status to live with this random girl that you might have talked to once in the first town. There's no worthwhile consequence for dying. You lose all your gems, which act as this game's magic points. Only you almost never need magic, so it doesn't end up mattering hardly at all. The backtracking at the end of the game is terrible. Just before you can challenge the final boss, you need to backtrack to find these two specific items that are impossible to obtain the first time around. So you spend a chunk of time running around all the past areas like an asshole, looking for monsters that you weren't able to kill with your equipment at the time. If your sword isn't powerful enough, there are multiple spots where you can't even damage the enemies. So you either needed to have the foresight to write these spots down, or you need to look them up where they are online. After getting all this out, I'm not sure I disagree a whole lot with the pervading opinion. Honestly, my assessments seem largely the same, but my conclusion is somehow different. The common rap is that Soul Blazer is good, but it's not like anybody tries to claim that it was one of Quintet's better games. This is one of those cases where playing every single game in the SNES RPG canon will give me somewhat of a unique perspective. Most people look at this game in the context of everything else Quintet would go on to make, and they see a prototype version of better games that don't yet exist in the purview of this series. If you count Shadowrun, which I technically did before thinking of this series, Soul Blazer is the 7th Super Nintendo RPG I've looked at. With that context alone, I'd rank it above Lagoon for sure, but somewhere below the likes of the next few games like Arcana and Draken. It's a small sample size, but 6th place out of 7 places Soul Blazer firmly below average.